Hello. Hello and welcome. Well, should be live now. I'm trying to check on YouTube that it's turning up. So, hello everybody. Welcome to another session of John Chappell Natural Philosophy Society on one of my anti-relativity talks. And this talk is called Are There Experiments That Show Faster Than Light Speed C? It's part 2, and it's dealing with a continuation of what I was dealing with last time and covering some issues that needed further clarification. So hold on a minute, I'll check YouTube's still working all right. Yep, YouTube's on. Hopefully everybody can hear me. And so let's start the session, the slides up. So carrying on from part 1, trying to deal with a few of the issues that have been raised. So I was dealing with Howard Miles, who was a mathematician, and he's written several papers dealing with relativity. And this is an article, and I got messed up the date there. So he was dealing with faster than light in a electronics magazine, and so the idea being conveyed that there are useful information that can be sent faster than light speed c, contrary to what the mainstream says, and that means the speed of light in vacuum free of the influence of fields. So sorry, the date of the article got messed up there. So carrying on, first issue that was raised is I should have really gone into more details about this, and it's an article by Rolf, and it deals with 2 myths about special relativity, and it's dealing with the issue that he points out that the Lorentz transformations do not reduce to the Galilean transformations when the ratio v divided by speed is small, and that's contrary to what is taught, and i.e. students are taught to believe in false mathematics. So the math of relativity looks deceptively simple to begin with, but has a fatal flaw which has resulted in it being misdealt with. What is taught as maths for relativity is mathematically false. The Lorentz transformations do not reduce to Galilean transformations as v tends to 0, contrary to what many people believe. Many people who believe in relativity believe that false bit of mathematics, and they actually teach it to physics students to believe in that false piece of mathematics. So the Lorentz transformations for time is t prime is equal to gamma open bracket t minus vx divided by c squared, and that does not tend to the Galilean transformation of time of t prime equals to t, as v tends to 0. So I want to show the maths of that now. I did skip going into too much details of that mathematics in the last session, and I want to clarify it now. So the gamma factor is the square root open bracket minus v squared divided by c squared close bracket, and for low speed, i.e. as v tends to 0, that gamma then starts to tend to 1 as an approximation. So setting gamma as 1, that Lorentz transformation equation becomes t minus Vx divided by c squared. Now, looking at the Vx divided by c squared part, we have two variables, v and x. For Vx, as v tends to 0, if x were constant, then Vx would tend to 0. But x is not a constant, it's a variable, so Vx does not in general tend to 0. The belief that Lorentz transformations tend to Galilean transformations has been built on false belief of treating x as a constant. As a consequence, most of the math that relativists have been saying is false. And unfortunately, I can't see the bottom bit of that. Okay. Thus can set Vx so that it does not necessarily tend to 0. Thus Vx divided by c squared need not vanish, i.e. tend to 0. Vx divided by c squared does not tend to 0 as v tends to 0. So the t prime equals gamma open bracket t minus Vx divided by c squared close bracket tends to t minus Vx divided by c squared as v tends to 0 and does not tend to t prime is equal to t. Therefore, when taught that Lorentz transformation tends to Galilean transformations as v tends to 0 is a false claim, i.e. the equations given with the condition that Lorentz transformations tend to Galilean transformations as v tends to 0 is false. In other words, the math is wrong. To get the valid maths, have to change the condition for that equation by saying something like Lorentz transformations tend to gt as v tends to. I'll see if I can make this screen larger. Yeah. So hopefully you can see it better than I can see it. Next. And given an example of a place where they are teaching the false mathematics, it's this place here. You can find online lots of lecture notes for what students are taught. And this is one example from a physics website on teaching relativity lecture number 4. And it says in that lecture, notice that in the limit that as v divided by c tends to 0, but v remains finite, the Lorentz transformations approach the Galilean transformations. So only when v is compatible to c are the effects of special relativity revealed. And that is the false claim. So in general, a great deal of the maths being taught to students about relativity is wrong. So ideally, I would like to do more talks going into more detail about the rest of the maths being taught to students being wrong, and also what is said about relativity is mostly myths. So ideally, I need to do a session on the myths of relativity, and there are a great many myths. Anyway, hopefully that clarifies that issue. As further inference, what is then said about can't go faster than c is based on the false mathematics. And so the next issue, there are others than Miles who say there are signals faster than light speed c and which can convey information. I think that was one of the things was queried, was it just Miles saying that? And no, there's other people. So this is the article by somebody back in 2008, and he's claiming Mozart was transmitted at 4.7 times the speed of light c. And so that was by Nimtz, if I pronounce his name properly. He's done the experiment, and he's saying it's a signal, i.e. information of Mozart music, and it's being transmitted at faster than the speed of light c. So it's not just Miles is saying that, but other people are saying it as well. So I have a video, and it's from the documentary called The Time Lords. And since then, the signal is said to be about 300 times the speed of light. They've managed to go faster than what's shown. So if I can now bring that video up. So remove that and add to stage and hopefully play this video. Right.
Those determined to change history might try to send a message backwards in time. But to do that, we'd have to send information faster than light, and that's impossible. However, right now an international row is brewing, because this man reckons he can send a signal faster than light into the realm where Einstein said time would run backwards.
This signal is split into, by an electronic mirror here, into two parts. So we can compare the signal. One is moving through the air and the other one is moving through the barrier.
Gunter Nimmt splits a microwave signal. The half that goes through the air travels at the speed of light and is displayed on an oscilloscope. The half that hits the barrier should go nowhere, but that's not what seems to happen.
This is an oscilloscope where you see the signal, and then we can see which one is faster.
The two humps on the screen are not in the same place, because one signal got there faster than the other, and the faster one tunneled through the barrier.
Only a very small part comes to the other side, but it comes, and this part comes at a velocity which is much faster than the velocity of light.
Nimmt believes that the faster signal uses a strange effect called quantum tunneling to get past the barrier. Tunneling depends on the fact that down at the quantum level, where particles are a lot smaller than atoms, the world is a totally random place. When a particle like a photon is here, it also has a small but very real chance of being here, or here, or here at the other end of the barrier. What Nimmt and his team did was to pick up the photons that appeared at the far end, and then to measure how fast they got there.
Achso, wie weit man runterkommt.
Ja, du brauchst jetzt nicht ernst zu werden.
I'm amused about this. We did this for fun. And when we figured out that it's faster than the velocity of light, we did not think about its importance.
The leader in this field, Raymond Chow, has misgivings about Nimpt's interpretations, but even he agrees with part of what Nimmt is saying.
In our experiments, we have measured that a single photon can tunnel across a tunnel barrier at 1.7 times the speed of light.
Chow agrees that quantum mechanical tunneling allows occasional random photons to break the light speed limit. What upsets him, and the rest of the physics world, is that Nimmt claims to have used it to send information faster than light. That really is taboo.
To have a genuine signal, you really have to control the signal. But in quantum mechanical tunneling, it's a completely random process. Fundamentally, we cannot send information with this tunneling particle.
Yeah, some colleagues were claiming that you cannot send information, and then we started to transmit Mozart 40, and this is, for instance, the original tape. That's what we sent at a speed of 4.7 times the velocity of light and a distance of about 14 centimeters. Whether you can recognize Mozart 40 or not,
Despite the random nature of the process, Mozart seems to have got through.
The essential question is, what is a signal, or what constitutes information? Has he really send signal in the sense of information faster than the speed of light. This is where Professor Nimst and I part company, because we don't really have a rigorous definition of what is information at the quantum level.
Maybe that this is not information for American colleague, but for a British colleague, I think Mozart 40 has some information in it.
So, I'll put the slides back on there. So, I think that was the type of experiment Miles is talking about, and so Nimst is doing that sort of experiment and thinking he's got a quantum effect going on there, and he thinks it's faster than light information being sent, but of course you get other people in the physics community who are disagreeing with that, so it's a issue of controversy. And I'll go back to the math. And I think it's if you go back to this, it's the maths that people in physics are being taught is wrong, and so they're believing things that are false. And so when they look at experiments, they are basing their beliefs on false mathematics. Hence why that other person thinks it's not information being sent faster than C, while Mintz is probably not thinking about it in those terms of messed up connection between Lorentz transformations and Galilean transformations, and then thinks it is faster than light. See, so what it is an interpretation problem. Those who believe and interpret experiments as not allowing information faster than light speed c have their mathematics wrong and believe in such things as Lorentz transformations reduced to Galilean transformations as speed tends to 0. And it's not just that bit of mathematics. When you go further into the mathematics which the physicists are being taught for relativity, then it is full of mistakes. So they're building false beliefs from their mathematics. So, and then there are other articles like this one where people start thinking things like, oh, particles faster than light might make up dark matter, scientists suggest. So you get all this sort of speculation of faster than light. And in that article it says, dark matter makes up over 95% of the universe, but it remains a mystery to date. And it carries on. 2 scientists have now suggested that particles known as tachyons, and that's particles that move faster than light speed c, likely make up the dark matter. So basically, in the context of relativity, can deal with tachyons, particles that are faster than light. But in my point of view, they are doing it in the context of having the mathematics of relativity wrong, misunderstood. So they've messed up their mathematics. Next. So now on to the third issue. Need to go into more details of Miles' experiments. The problem there being that there are lots of different velocities, stroke speeds, that we can be talking about when dealing with signals. And Einstein's 1905 special relativity paper does not deal with that. Of course, Einstein is not talking about this issue of different velocities and different speeds. And one thing to note is that velocity is speed and direction, and will be lax in speaking of velocity and speed. Speed of light c is in a vacuum free of influences of field. But I'm referring to an article by Miles, who's using, I think, the word velocity, and maybe the word speed would be more appropriate. But in this talk which I'm doing, I'm just going to say velocity and speed mean much the same thing, and that's just being lax on my part. So Miles deals with gives more detail about this in his journal, and he has a paper in there called Superluminal Effects on Fine Wires, and he admits in that paper that he was rushed in writing it and that there might be a few minor mistakes. And so Miles goes on to explain there are different types of velocity of light. There are very, as you see him saying, there are very many definitions of the velocity of light. They fall into three broad categories, differing within those categories in lesser details. It is to one, I try and make the thing bigger. Hold on. Is to paper relates. It is to one of these categories. That's one type is velocity of speed that this paper relates. The second, as they are outlined below. Velocity to begin with is defined as the quotient of a measured distance traversed by a moving object by the elapsed time it takes for it to traverse that distance. This may be a variable within the ranges involved, and so it may be abstracted to velocity at a given place or a given instant by passing to a limit and using the derivative of distance with respect to time in place of the grosser practical measurements. There is implied in this that the benchmarks are established already, both spatially and temporally. Also, one must know what is moving and be able to fix upon some identifying part of the object so as to be able to decide accurately when it is passes a benchmark with an adequate degree of precision. As the first and most obvious definition, then the velocity of light would be the distance between a source of light turned on in original darkness and a receiver divided by the time it took for it to be sent to the receiver. This is much the same as it would be defined for a sound to be heard at some distant point, made by, say, a gun fired somewhere else. Such is called a leading edge velocity, and it is a much more complicated matter to estimate when closely analysed than what it might seem to be at first, but we have no need to delve into the complications here, as this class of definition is not pertinent to the present discussions. For further information, the interested reader may care to read. He's referring to an example would be a laser beam interrupted by a rotating disc with holes in it that chops the beam into alternate segments of light and dark. The illuminated segments traveling from the chopper to a target at a measured distance away in a measured length of time. It is within this category that most of the experiments from determining C to greater accuracy have been performed, although recent determinations use more sophisticated methods. So the reference he refers to are these, and for the second one, there's an English translation of it, and from my information sources, it points out that that has been badly translated into English. Anyway, Miles carries on, and he says the wearing back of the leading edge of such a light pulse at the step created when darkness suddenly changes to light presents a problem that has been well experimentally tested to occur, it may be seen that the leading edge velocity does not accord with the velocity of the light segment as a whole, which is faster. Indeed, the wearing back is just what limits the accuracy of this type of experiment. It accounts for the ultimate extinguishing of the light segment if it traverses a long enough distance, as the energy in it is consumed activating the medium which it has transversed. And so he's making a remark there as well, but he's got some sort of minor typo mistake when he said constant back earlier, so I've sort of like made a guess as what he meant. And he says in the comments he needs to get that precursor from that sort of, he never gets that precursor. So the analysis by Sommerfeld and that is probably wrong from Miles' point of view. Miles continues, if pressed further, someone might suggest as a definition for what is the velocity of light that since light is a wave motion, its speed would be determined like that of a wave on the surface of the ocean by following a selected crest from one determined place on the Earth's surface to another, a measured distance away, and then dividing by the time it took that crest to go from the first benchmark to the second. This is the wave velocity of light, and the present endeavour relates to this class definition, which we shall elaborate upon in greater detail below. Suffice it is to say here that there is no immediate implication of any equality between the first definition and the second one, any more than there is between the velocity of the point of a drill bit drilling into a thick piece of metal and the rate at which the quill of the drill press descends. So basically you have different sorts of things which you can call the velocity or the speed of light. And he goes on below and he uses the term c squared as meaning a speed, which can't be right. It must be a mistake being made, maybe a typo, because c squared is not a speed, and so he probably means some multiple of c. So he goes on to explain the third class of velocities of light is more subtle, but nevertheless the most common occurrence in nature. This is a modulation of a carrier wave of the second type that is superimposed as a change of amplitude on the sublatent carrier wave. So he's talking about three different types of velocities. And actually, when you look into it further, there's even more velocities. And so the issue becomes more and more complicated. And as I pointed out, naturally, Einstein, in his 1905 paper on special relativity, doesn't talk about any of these complications. He's talking about the velocity or the speed of light in vacuum as being c, and sort of like, well, what about the other ones? What are the other? He doesn't clarify. So it's sort of a bodge to try to connect this into special relativity. Anyway, hopefully that's sufficiently explains what he's doing as regards to confusion issue of different types of velocity stroke speeds of light. And he's picking up he's using the oscilloscope on these circuits. And finally, the last issue is this French person, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Brillouin and Sommerfeld, who's German, have analysed the issue that Miles is dealing with, but he finds reason to dismiss what they say. And I'm checking what these people are saying, Sommerfeld and Brillouin. Oh goodness, where's the book? Here it is. I got the book now. Got the book now of what they're saying, and so that's something else to check, and which would probably be a part 3 to this issue, but basically the belief at the moment from Miles is these people have got it wrong. So Miles points out it's quite trivial to do electron experiments and have electrical signals going faster than light speed c. And as I pointed out, I think that's what NIMS is doing as well. As a mathematician is thinking, if don't like the equations being used in physics, then can modify them. But I don't know what physicists think. Maybe they think should stick rigidly to the equations and not modify them. So it's a different way of looking at things again. I think the mainstream physicists who believe there's no faster than light information signals have got their mathematics messed up, and are also refusing to correct their mathematics. So it's, whilst a mathematician who looks at this sort of thing like Miles would say, well, just change the mathematics, but those physicists stay from a point of view where we got the mathematics and we're not going to change it. They stick rigidly to something that's wrong. So thus we have the impasse that those who believe relativity, in this case what Miles is calling the C hypothesis, won't address the criticisms that distance have. And the math is very simple. It's V is equal to 1 divided by the square root, open bracket, capital L times capital C. And the lowercase c stands for light speed c in vacuum. And from that simple equation for velocity or speed v, you end up with faster than light speed c. But sort of like those who believe in relativity don't want to make that simple connection in the mathematics. They would like to say, modify that equation in some way. So I'll emphasize it again. Mathematicians such as Miles find themselves facing mainstream, and that's the mainstream physicists that believe in relativity and will dismiss what they say. But the mainstream works on having false beliefs about relativity and mathematics. That mainstream, then being unable to see its mistakes, dismisses mathematicians such as Miles as cranks. And unfortunately, in the distant movement, there is a section that rebels at mathematizing physics. So what should be the distance pointing out that the mainstream have the maths wrong, then gets diverted onto those distance with an anti-mathematics attitude. And you've got to admit that that physics has become more mathematical, and really the mainstream physicists have messed up their mathematics. But you can't, with a certain faction of distance who are rebelling against all the mathematics that has diverted from the issue, that really should be criticizing the mainstream for having their mathematics wrong. So Einstein omits saying for what values his equations are valid, and that's if you go back to his, especially his 1905 paper on special relativity. He doesn't say when his equations are valid, and i.e. in the sense of what values are his equations supposed to work for. And if you're writing a mathematician, if it was a mathematician writing the paper, it would be giving the equations and stating for what values that equation is supposed to be valid. But Einstein's not doing that. And so not presenting conditions on the equations, and then you can derive mathematical nonsense from his equations. So Einstein is just bad at mathematics, and he should have presented the conditions for when his equations were valid, but he didn't. Most physicists follow his example as being bad at mathematics. So Einstein set the trend for his fans, who the physicists, for most physicists, the fans of Einstein, thinking he's a genius, and he set the trend for those physicists to be bad at mathematics in the same sort of way. So ideally, Einstein's relativity should have been discarded as bad mathematics, but physicists, being bad at mathematics themselves, just went ahead and accepted it. Based on having to accept Einstein's relativity, my analysis reveals the following. Einstein was mistranslated from German into English. And other people have noticed that, like Edward Dowdy, and David de Hilse has pointed out that Edward Dowdy, who was fluent in German and English, recognized when you read the German version of Einstein's paper, it's a different theory to what is being translated to in English. And next comes the issue of faster than light signals, FTL, and that was dealt with by Summerfield, and that has been mistranslated in English as well. So there seems to be a lot of these German papers being mistranslated into English. So in general, the situation is as follows, as far as I can understand it. In the earliest 20th century, Germany was dominant in physics, so most of the important physics papers were in German. After World War II and the dropping of the atom bomb, America became dominant in physics. Then most of the German papers were translated into English, but the translations were bad. I think it was not just the case of Einstein being mistranslated into English. I think most of those German papers were mistranslated into English. It was not just Einstein's paper that was badly translated into English. Thus, English-speaking physics community is based on a foundation of German physics papers being badly misrepresented into English. Along with the theories being misrepresented, the math has also been distorted. Whilst mathematicians such as Miles can point out problems in physics, but the physics community working for distorted theories and distorted mathematics don't want to see it his way. Ideally should end it here because it then gets too fantastical, but I'm carrying on. So let's get on to the conspiracy side of things. And I have 3 examples here. And I'm not going to be able to deal with them properly. And it would also be probably need to be dealt with in another session. The first issue is that Tesla is the center of many conspiracies. According to the Tesla website, what's being shown there is a bit crunched up, but according to that, Tesla is thinking that he's found electrical signals that are FTL, fast and speed of light C. So Tesla back in late 19th century, early 20th century, was thinking he was getting these electrical signals as well. And what happened was that Tesla was quite famous, but he was saying things which were not in agreement with what Einstein was later seeming to say. And so the mainstream went with Einstein and they dismissed Tesla as a crank. So that's one conspiracy theory, the conspiracy theory over Tesla. The mainstream sort of like ignored what he was saying in favor of what they thought Einstein meant. But as I pointed out, Einstein, I've pointed out other times that what the mainstream claims Einstein says, most of the times he doesn't actually say, and it's sort of like a mistranslation, a misinterpretation of what Einstein was saying. So back to Miles. He says this, Austria skepticism has dammed up the natural course of science. It is known that superluminary wave velocities occur in radar waveguides. The author has searched every electrical engineering reference book at the local university library for detailed information on this subject and a technical description relating to it, and come away empty-handed, except for the most casual of remarks confirming the occurrence of it. Even realizing that radar was developed under limitations of wartime secrecy, there is no accounting for the privacy of information that is available on something which is of so great fundamental importance, except that a conspiracy exists to preserve the status quo. So he's noting there that he thinks there's a conspiracy to cover up things to do with radar, because when he tried to research the information on radar, it wasn't there. Information is being kept secret. And my friend Miles Osmaston, who claimed to work for MOD, Ministry of Defence, he worked on classified work on radar and said it showed relativity is wrong, but it's not something that allowed generally out into the unclassified world. So you've got this possible conspiracy here where radar experiments are being done, but it's under the aegis of being secret. And so it's not coming out from the radar experiments that the relativity is wrong. It's a national secret. Right, the next one, third type of conspiracy. You may remember headlines like this a few years ago, and it's the faster than light ? CERN findings bewilder scientists, and they thought they'd found that neutrinos were going FTL, faster than the speed of light at sea. So as you read the article, next. So initially they thought they had faster than light neutrinos, faster than light speed C. Then later they thought about it some more and decided that their detectors then they found reasons for not believing that result. So first of all, they thought it was FTL. Then they looked at it a bit more and decided it wasn't FTL. But however, it ties back to the math again, which I illustrated earlier about Lorentz transformations and Galilean transformations. The mainstream point of view is not to want to interpret the maths as giving FTL. They've got their understanding of the Lorentz transformations and the Galilean transformations wrong. And so when they're going to look at an experiment like the neutrinos, which were thought to go faster than the speed of light, they're suddenly going to impose their false beliefs of mathematics onto that result and decide that that experiment didn't actually show FTL. FTL does not want to interpret the relevant experiments as showing FTL. So I bring in Galileo into this, and unfortunately this slide's been messed up. I looked at this slide yesterday and these slides yesterday and they were right, but suddenly uploading onto StreamYard and somehow it's been distorted a bit because I've put on too much information in one place. But basically it goes back to the idea of Galileo, hence the picture of Galileo. He looked through his telescope and he saw things which he thought meant that the existing physics of his day was wrong. The existing physics was the Earth was the centre of the universe and the sun moved around the Earth and so forth. And he looked into his telescope and said, oh, that can't be right. That theory can't be right. Mainstream must be wrong. And what he faced was, he was threatened with torture if you don't shut up and all that sort of thing, and put under house arrest. And so it was the same sort of problem then. Physics is still in the same sort of issue. physics is supposed to be based upon empirical evidence, but it's not really. It's based upon interpretation of empirical evidence. In the case of Galileo, he was getting his empirical evidence, and the existing physics authorities, which were the church, were also churchmen, they didn't want to place the same interpretation onto the evidence as what Galileo wanted to put on. So in general, it's all boils down to the same thing. Physics is really about interpretation of empirical evidence, and then it's arguing about interpretation of that empirical evidence. And at the moment, the mainstream, which is meaning the majority of physicists, are imposing their beliefs onto the interpretation of experiments based upon false beliefs about mathematics. And so when people like Miles is pointing out that there is faster than light signals, the mainstream's coming back and not wanting to interpret it that way. And thank you, that's the end finish. So we can open it up now to discussion. Hopefully I was clear enough on what I was talking about. I covered quite a lot of issues there. I covered the issue of other people saying a similar sort of thing to what Miles was saying, and I was pointing out there is a difference between a person who's more accurate in their mathematics, which Miles probably would have been as a mathematician, than what a physicist is who's making a mess in his mathematics. And so those physicists now making a mess of the mathematics are imposing false beliefs onto their interpretation of empirical evidence. Thank you. End of that talk. Let's close that down and open up to people. Hi, hello, I'm back again. Like my hat. That's it. Advertising David DeHilter's book. So have I got anything here? Anybody in the green room got their hands up? No. I think I managed to confuse people by having this talk at a different time to normal. A sort of question came on too early at the old time. So nobody's put their hand up, so I go through the comments. So, I can't get to at the beginning. I get back to the beginning. Anybody else? So the first comment showed, is quantum entanglement the only or main way that FTL interaction is allegedly possible? Well, actually, I'm not actually talking too much about quantum mechanics. That's when you try to combine relativity to quantum physics, that's one of the things that comes up is quantum entanglement, and then that leads to a lot more argument about saying that information can't be sent faster than the speed of light. And so, hi. Yeah, so moving down, I see what is sort of relevant. So what's this? Superstring theory. Well, in the mainstream are trying to unify relativity with quantum physics, and so one of their ideas is superstring theory. So there's still discussion about that. So next one is quantum entanglement accepted within the mainstream? I think it is. They've done experiments. I think there's been a Nobel Prize awarded for it now. To anyone out there who has alternate views to relativity, how would you disprove it using the fewest words as possible. Well, it's supposed in physics you're supposed to be able to disprove theory by experiments, empirical evidence, and unfortunately with relativity, as I tried to point out, what the people who believe in relativity are doing is imposing force mathematics onto their interpretation of experiments. So basically you're not going to get anywhere. You've got to get in deep into the mathematics and show them that their mathematics is wrong. So some questions there about ether, so passing on those. I wasn't talking about ether, I don't think, this time around. Yeah, so so David and Hill did have this idea of doing a dissident book, but what I understand at the moment he's too busy with anything to be able to do anything else. So he's being overworked. He's got work and he's got his wife's business, and then he's got to look at his father, and so he's not able to take up that idea anymore. He's just too busy with personal life issues, problems. The way I look at things, it needs to do a conference, and then people send in their papers for their talks, and then there's publish a book of the conference proceedings. Going down these comments and come on, show right. So yeah, what does anyone here think of philosophy? Well, in my view, science is a certain philosophy, but then certain scientists think science is beyond philosophy, is better than philosophy. So it's arguable. It ends up with arguing more about the philosophy. More stuff about philosophy. Still tends to be philosophy. It is said that mathematics is the only thing which is provable what the existence of the person who performed the mathematics and the world in which they live. Well, in mathematics, you start from assumptions, axioms, and so forth, and you work out the consequences of that. And if your assumptions are true, and if you haven't made any mistakes, then the consequences are true as well. And so that's supposed to be their proof. You could argue that the assumptions are wrong. So to a certain extent, mathematics proves things, but to another extent, it's not able to prove the assumptions it's working for. So there's still more in philosophy. So he wants to, Question wants to give a talk. So if you sort of email us that, so there's a email address for this John Chappell Natural Philosophy Society, if you go on to the main page of that, there must be a way of contacting us on there saying that you want to give a talk. So I've got about paradoxes, time dilation. I haven't actually talked about time dilation. Why? More about time dilation. Okay, moving on. Still more about time dilation, and then this length contraction. Then it's ether. So that's, yeah, what is the velocity of a given object relative to? And that's one of the things I pick up on when I read Einstein. I think he's being ambiguous, vague about that sort of thing. So when you have somebody turns on the light, a bulb or a torch, and the light goes away from you, then you say, well, that light is moving relative to you with a certain velocity or speed. But what would another person say about that? Would another person say from their point of view that it was the same speed as what you got? And Einstein doesn't really explain that very well. So I start arguing about it. Still more about ether. It's a question of whether ether is fixed or stationary. So still more. Sure. So I'm interested to have discussions with anyone through email, even possibly through StreamYard. So yeah. So what's the link to this session? I don't know. Paste. Hopefully I posted what hopefully is the link to this session. That you, if you use the link, you can enter the green room. I think it's just posted. Hopefully that's the correct one. So those more questions that tend to be more philosophy. So finally leaving questions onto somebody else. John Wheeler, no, John Walker, sorry, says time dilation was experimentally confirmed, and most of us dispute the interpretation of what that means, and there's been other talks on that. So this is the type of content I like to talk about, the work with Dr. Edward Dowdy and a return to classical physics under the framework of Galilean variance. Yeah. So I tried to point out part of the reason why that has been messed up is the mess up between Lorentz transformations and Galilean transformations. It's back to question again. It says, What of Einstein's maximum velocity of interaction? Well, I dispute what Einstein says about things, what the mainstream says Einstein says about things. The things that Einstein's commonly attributed to have said, I think he didn't really say, and it ends up with people imposing their interpretation upon what they think Einstein meant. And one of the interpretations is that they interpret Einstein as having the maximum velocity of interaction, and I don't think he really explicitly says that. So it's once again people trying to impose their interpretation onto relativity and getting things wrong, but then they falsely attribute it to Einstein. I don't know. It's not clear whether they're being addressed to me or not. Yeah, that's right. Vx equals 0 if v equals 0. Yeah, that's right. But that's only a sort of like trivial case when v is not quite 0, then the Vx term is not quite 0 as well. And you can just increase x. If you're making v smaller, you can make x bigger, and that stops Vx from shrinking, getting smaller. So something about gravity waves. So it's going off in different directions. So problem is all the terms have not been mathematically defined in the discussion. Well, unfortunately, it's how far do you want me to go back on things? I assume by this stage that most people understand the equations of Lorentz transformations and Galilean transformations, particularly if they've done other relativity things. They know what those equations look like. And if you want me to start deriving those equations, well, that's a whole lesson in itself. So how far do you want me to go back when we want me to start talking about things? Something about orbit the sun through gravity. Yeah, so no plasma slows light. Don't know. So get onto something like that. Get comments like no plasma slows light. I don't know. This one might be something related to what I was talking about, other than going off in other directions. And the signal in the experiment going through air is not travelling at sea. It's not in a vacuum. It is slowed by the index rarefaction of the air in the lab. And, well, you've got the equation for V equals to the 1 divided by the square root of capital L times capital C. I'm supposed to be dealing with that related to the index of refraction. Another one. I hadn't seen previous comments. I fully support that communications faster than C are possible. However, the test demonstrating the video is flawed as the free space signal is in air, not vacuum. way it's a factor. You got the speed of light in air, and you got the speed of light in vacuum, and you just a multiplication factor to bring them together. So the question says, I have to admit I've gotten sidetracked and haven't watched much of the video yet. I'll have to rewatch later. So it's sort of like the comments section is going off into a private conversation. They're still into their private conversation. So it's hard going through these comments when they're all into their private conversation. So need to flag up if you're making a comment about the video talk I gave. So I'm not getting anywhere. I'm not getting anywhere with these comments. So I'll give them a miss now. So that's good. That's this one. So right, finish. Right. So is there anybody going to put their hand up? Be the first to be fired in the green room. Anybody in the green room? Oh yes, got Cornelius. Okay, I think Cornelius is first. So,
can you hear me okay here?
Okay. I can hear you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, all right. Well, I don't have any trouble understanding or believing that there's a faster than light medium or faster than light transmission of information, because I look at light as a transverse wave as far as I interpret and understand it, and I look at things as being a solid medium. The ether is a solid in my view, and I look at a lot of solids, and most all solids have will support both transverse and longitudinal waves, and in most all cases, there are longitudinal waves that are always traveling faster than the transverse waves. So if it's a solid, and if the transverse waves exist and the longitudinal waves exist, then the longitudinal waves, which are not electromagnetic waves, but probably the waves that are responsible for gravity and mass, could easily be transferring and moving faster by far than the transverse light waves. And the information could be transmitted from one solid object to the other, which is not really a solid object. Doesn't exist anything other than a wave pattern, in my view, in a solid ether. So in that case, there's no problem discerning, something that moves faster than light.
Yeah.
There was also a question earlier. I think Shockwave was mentioning that gravity moved faster than light, and gravity, because otherwise the sun would, the Earth wouldn't stay in orbit with the sun. But there's a difference between what the gravitational field is, which is the entire formation of the energy pattern around the sun, and the actual, like a gravitational wave, which is a change in that strength of gravity traveling throughout space. And the gravitational wave is a change in the strength of gravity, whereas gravity itself is basically the strength of the gravitational field within that space. And that's why, like, they'll depict space as a curved gravitational field with the old ball and the diaphragm type thing. So that diaphragm is always there. It's just the objects are responding to the amount of distortion there is in gravity in that particular area. So the gravitational field doesn't travel, but a distortion or change in its strength would. And the speed at which the distortion or change in its strength could be no faster than the speed of light, as it could be. They detect that as a transverse wave again. So that's kind of my take on it.
I didn't touch on gravitational waves. Sort of this problem I was dealing with is electrical waves, but I think there's dissent with what the mainstream is saying about gravitational waves, because the mainstream thinks they've detected gravitational waves, and I've been to some of their talks on it, and they think they're traveling at light speed c.
Yeah, and I don't think they really detected the waves that are responsible for gravity. What they've detected is fluctuations in the gravitational field that are traveling through the gravitational field, the changes in the field, but not necessarily the waves that are responsible for maintaining and creating the field in the first place. And I believe those waves, which are much finer, much faster moving, are the waves that are also responsible for the creation of matter and mass.
Yeah, it's kind of circular, really, isn't it? Gravity, objects attract each other, and then you're saying if gravity makes the objects in the first place.
Well, it's not really circular, because if the object is nothing more than a wave pattern,
yeah,
then what you're saying is, those wave patterns coalesce into a point, and that becomes an object, because the wave patterns become so strong in that area of space, they look distinctly different. Any other waves entering that area can easily be distorted or bent by interference with that particular wave pattern. And that's kind of what I see is happening when light encounters a particle. It's encountering another wave pattern within that media, and that wave can be deflected by interacting with the passing wave. So if it's all waves, basically, in non-continuous elastic or non-particular elastic cominium, there's no particles to the ether, and therefore we can't detect the ether. We can only detect the waves that are propagating through it, or the standing waves that have been created in it, which we see as particles.
Yeah, the ethers is just a big topic in itself. Okay, thank you.
Right.
Cheers. Any more hands up? Anybody else? Anybody else want to offer themselves up for sacrifice? No? No? No more hands in the green room? Vladimir, James. Okay. So I got these questions in the comments, and they don't really seem to be dealing with my talk. If I try to scroll down and quickly. That's it. They're going off in tangents all the time, I think. Current chat room. So, what's it? So he says, "Hey Roger, please look at the current chat room activity." I'm looking. So what am I supposed to be dealing with? Hey. Says, "Hey Roger, please look up." Why would you say that? Yeah. It's a question. I don't know if it means this comment. I think I was the only one here at the very beginning session. So the talk, in my time, this talk starts at 3 p.m. and I think question turned up too early because this talk had been moved on 4 hours. So we had a lot of comments by question at the beginning. So is that what he means? What Andrew says, something cool related to special relativity is that one of my interns showed that the signal delay between the gamma and neutron peak radiations we see in the reactor is exactly what you expect from special relativity. Yeah. And as I pointed out, the physicists are making a mess of the mathematics at the beginning. Another one by Andrew. Photons travel at the speed of light and fast neutrons are semi-relativistic. You can measure the difference in when those two radiation types hit a detector at a nuclear reactor. And then they proceed to make the mess in their mathematics, from my point of view. So, it's still private comments going on here. Hey. So, hey Roger, that comment on the screen isn't relevant. Don't know. I'm just struggling through here all the comments which are really dealing with their private conversations. So, going on, there's still private conversation. Yeah. My intern was a nuclear engineer. Great. We used to have nuclear engineer turns up at our talks in our group, and he's pointed out that relativity is wrong. So the nuclear engineers who come to that conclusion that relativity is wrong. Unfortunately, I think he's passed away now. My PhD was in relativistic heavy ion physics. Well, we had one of our dissidents is Cynthia Whitney. She was a PhD in relativity, and she decided relativity was wrong. And so she got very disheartened by that. Roger, you accused my intern of being a physicist with zero evidence. So what was it? He was an engineer, so he's trying to make a distinction between an engineer and physicist. Well, both deal with physics to some extent, and engineer is more concerned with trying to make things work. So physicist seems to be concerned with theorizing. So I think you said to Andrew that you were a physicist, so if you've got people working for you, a mixture of physicists and engineers, I suppose. You should give a clue about how. He's sort of like non sequitur, right? Just making stuff up, I think. So I think that's the end of the comments. So. Let's go back to earlier comment. Neutron. Basically, Andrew. What's he saying? I can't find that comment about the intern. Yeah, that's the comment from Andrew about the intern. Something cool related to special relativity is that one of my interns showed that the signal delay between the gamma and the neutron peaks we see in a reactor is exactly what you expect for special relativity. Yeah, but then if I did mention that your intern was a physicist, then really he's an engineer, sorry, but the physics that they teach engineers and physicists is false a lot of the time, as I pointed out in my video here, that especially when they talk about Lorentz transformations and Galilean transformations. So what they do is they just mess up the mathematics, and that's really the relevant point. So you do an experiment and you relate it to relativity, and what you're doing then is making a mess of the mathematics, and that's as per the way you've been taught to do things. So one of the issues I would probably like to do is about the myths of relativity, and what they teach students in physics classes, whether they're engineers or physicists or whatever. And sometimes liberal arts students do physics, and other non-physics type students, and what they teach them is a lot of the time false, and they don't actually teach them something that's real about relativity. They teach them a myth about relativity. And so I've got quite a lot of papers on the myths that are taught. And so based upon believing things that are false about physics and particularly about relativity, then those students then go on and carry on with that false belief for the rest of their lives and misunderstand what's really going on. So I covered that issue. So KVS measured by the time change in travel time of the light wave traveling through the detector. Yeah, and you end up with different velocities or speeds for light depending on how you're going to think of those things. So, any more hands? No hands in the green room. Hi, James is suddenly decided. There we go. Hello, James. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for your presentation. Several things I'd like to clarify, if I may. Mm-hmm. If in that expression, when v equals 0, are you disputing that the expression does not, the entire expression in which v is a factor does not go to 0?
I could call it at a stage of port.
I don't capture exactly why you were saying that the math is wrong.
What is wrong? Yeah. So let's go back.
In reducing a Lorentz transformation to a Galilean frame with v equals 0.
You're talking about v tending to 0.
I think it's the expression where you had vx divided by c squared.
Yeah. So you're talking about v tending to 0, not actually being 0. Sort of when they talk about these things, they talk about a variable tending.
So in reference to the discussion with Ian Cohen a few weeks ago, you're really not disputing then that the Lorentz transform reduces to a Galilean frame when v equals 0.
When v equals 0, it's sort of like the trivial case. If you in that t prime, which is shown on the screen, that t prime is equal to gamma t minus vx divided by c squared. When v equals 0, gamma equals 1, and vx divided by c squared, that equals 0. So it would be just be t prime is equal to t, and that's sort of like a trivial case. It's in general, v is supposed to have other values than just 0. You're talking about it reduces the Lorentz transformation reduces to the Galilean transformation in the trivial case of v equals 0. But when v is not 0 and it's very small, then it's not reducing. And that's what is meant by v tends to 0.
Well, I don't think anyone claims
actually equals it.
That you would have a problem if v equals 0. In other words, you're sort of saying that the math is wrong, and it's not clear why you're saying that the math is wrong. Because if v equals 0, you seem to acknowledge that, yes, we have, in what you call a trivial case, the Galilean transform.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to be all that trivial. That seems to be a matter of judgment.
Well, it translates to that everybody's agreeing that the speed is equal to 0. So really, to be interesting, you want to consider what happens when speed is not 0.
Okay, moving on to another topic. This idea of censorship of anti-special relativity thought and literature.
Is that Miles? Is that I'll bring it up. Is that the Miles one? Miles. I had 3 examples of conspiracy. And fortunately, that Tesla one, the Tesla one, or the Miles one.
Roger, I'm just making a general comment here, sir.
Yeah.
And the general comment is that often we hear in these sessions that anti-SR thought and literature is censored, and that is probably generally true. I don't dispute that. But you yourself cite a number of papers where people taking exception to special relativity have been published.
Yeah.
So in other words, this censorship is not necessarily as ironclad as some people might.
It's not ironclad. People can say whatever they like. People, in this example I put on the screen, Miles is pointing out that you couldn't find information about radar experiments, and I tried pointing out that radar experiments seem to be come under national security, and so they don't get out to the public domain too much. But what was the other one? So if I'll go back to that video. So that video.
Well, it's just that you did cite some papers.
Yeah. So that video I pointed out, faster than light. Yeah, so I had the video from the documentary The Time Lords. So in that video clip, they did have a person dissenting with relativity,
like that one that just flashed on the screen.
That one, it's on there now. Faster than light, Mozart. The Mozart.
In other words, this censorship that we often speak about in these sessions is not 100%. That people who dissent regarding special relativity in the mainstream manage to get some of their work published.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And so that's just a general. It's not about your presentation in particular, Roger. It's just about in general these sessions. We talk a lot about the anti-SR people being censored by the mainstream, and this is not entirely 100% true. If that's the impression one might get.
No.
A last point is I have to admit that it's probably my own failing, but the so-called if this was a focus of today's talk, the Milnes, Milnes work is not clear to me, in terms of what it actually did to demonstrate faster than light speeds.
What, NIMS? NIMS, you mean? this one I'm pointing on the screen at the
Yeah,
moment.
right. Milnes. Milnes.
Yeah, Professor.
So I'm not clear, from this presentation anyway. I would humbly suggest to you, dear sir, that if you could present, like if a particular experiment is really a focus in terms of the faster than light theme, that really we break down exactly what the person did. Perhaps you did to some extent, but I sort of missed it. I have no idea what this person did in this experiment. So that's
the video that video clip was explaining from the Time Lords documentary what they put out as their explanation of what was going on in that documentary.
I guess I wasn't fast enough to catch exactly what he did. He was measuring speeds with an oscilloscope and so forth, and it would be nice to. Well, okay, I'll have to consider that.
His interpretation was that was faster than light signal giving information, but the majority of the mainstream dispute that interpretation. So, and it's a general thing that people have got freedom to say what they think, and then the mainstream will dispute that. They will come back and disagree with it. So, Professor Nimtz in that documentary film was stating his belief that those experiments were giving faster than light speed c, but then they came back from the mainstream was they didn't believe that. They didn't believe that interpretation. And as I tried to point out at the end with Galileo, Galileo really faced the problem that the mainstream of his day didn't accept Galileo's interpretation of the evidence he was putting forward. Galileo was interpreting it that the Aristotle physics, geocentric physics was wrong, but the mainstream wasn't going along with Galileo's interpretation of the evidence that Galileo was presenting. And it's the same thing with this video here with Professor Nimtz. His interpretation is it's faster than light, but the mainstream interpretation is not. So it's always an interpretation problem of empirical evidence, more so than the empirical evidence itself. And as I pointed out, that the problem is that the maths that the mainstream believes in is false. It's they're trying to interpret experiments from mathematics, which is false. So,
well, thank you, sir.
Thank you. So hopefully that's clarified things. It's pretty complicated dealing with things to try to point out that how the mainstream goes wrong on things. They go wrong on the maths. They go wrong on the history they present to physics students, because I've got videos on what they teach to physics students about the history, and they don't present the proper physics history of what actually happened. They present a mythological version of history, and they justify that presenting a mythological version of history makes the subject easier to understand, because if they present the proper history, then the subject becomes more complicated. But actually, in my view, it doesn't. It just messes things up even more, because it then means that people who've had a physics education and they've been told things that are false, but they haven't realized what they've been taught is false, and they're carrying on with their false belief, and it extends to the history of the subject is being dumbed down and presented as something which is really a myth. And as it goes towards the math, the math hasn't been dealt with properly. And when it goes to experiments, well, experiments are subject to different interpretations as to what those experiments mean. And that's an issue which is called underdetermination. And they don't deal with that in physics courses. They don't deal with underdetermination, because the way science physics is done, it's split up into different disciplines, and so the issue of underdetermination is not considered something that a physics course would deal with. It's an issue which would be dealt with in the philosophy of physics. So you've got to do a philosophy of physics course to be taught about underdetermination. But if you do a normal physics course, they just miss that out. So the physics courses tend to miss out issues which they consider philosophical, which means that people doing physics have been given false understandings about pretty everything. The philosophy of physics is messed up, and the experiments are messed up, and the history is messed up, and the mathematics is messed up. It's all one gigantic mess, and that's what the physics community is doing. Thank you. So I think that's it. I think I covered it all. So if I can get that picture of Galileo up, it's sort of we still haven't really progressed from the days of Galileo, with Galileo with his telescope. He says things which the mainstream didn't want to believe in his day, and we're still getting that now, that the mainstream is not really open up to consider the possibility that they got everything wrong. And that's it. Thank you. So anything else? And I close the session down early. Unless anybody else wants to raise any comments. Let's have a look at the comments. So I think the comments are still dealing with their private conversations. So that's it then. That's the point of this video presentation. The physics community gets everything wrong. Okay, thank you. I'll close down now. Bye everyone. Bye. There's the end stream. Thank you.